here because they love brewing jank decks?
Yes.
Who's here because their friend is here and their friend loves brewing jank decks? Who's here because there's a comfy seat and it's air conditioned and we like that? Okay, yeah. So we got everybody. So different reasons, but hopefully this will be good for all of you. Yeah.
Welcome, MagicCon Chicago, to Weird But Works. This is a panel about brewing strange EDH decks without sacrificing efficiency. And I gotta tell you, like, I'm pretty excited for these awesome people right here, and we've got some excellent stuff to go over with y'all today. So let's get into it. So quick introductions. First of all, hi, I'm Benji the Brewer. Thanks. So today I will be covering a whole section called Inspired by the 99, where it's less about a commander in the command zone and more about doing cool stuff in the 99, and sort of leaning into that inconsistency. After that, Brad. Silly Brad, hello.
Hi, I'm Brad, also known as Steel City Brad on the internet. I'm going to be talking about building around unexpected mechanics. So things that separate your deck from like the typical path for a particular color combination or a particular commander.
Yeah. And I'm Steph. I go by Steel City Steph most places on the internet. And I will be talking about building weird creature types, building around those things. So atypical typal strategies. I see some head nods in here. I've got some kindred spirits out there. That was a joke, by the way, right? See what I did there? Yeah, good stuff.
One of our panelists, unfortunately, is not here. Giraffe who would be covering Flavor First Brewing. Admittedly, that's not one of our remaining strong suits, but we're going to do our best to cover that material as well. And then we have MTG Bird.
Hello, it's me, MTG Bird. Can be found at MTG Bird on the internet. I will be talking about how to power up those weird decks and still make them stronger. You know, still insert Mario on the list here, right? But yeah, just making those decks work and making them strong.
So, quick question. Who has built an EDH deck that they play and they go, wow, this is strange? Yeah, I love it. I love to see it. So, we have some thoughts about what makes a deck weird. Obviously, everyone's going to have their own sort of opinion on how that looks, what that looks like. But something for me is it's a deck that you can't easily find duplicates of, or uses cards that you don't typically see people play. So obviously you're going to have, those strong cards that make a deck work that you're going to see in a bunch of different places. Your removal, your interaction, your card draw. But finding those weird little niche cards to me help make a deck really, shine as a weird deck. Anyone else have any thoughts about what makes the deck weird?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things I look for, and honestly most of my decks, but when I'm specifically decks that I think are weird, is decks that sort of get, like in a pregame conversation when I'm talking about what my deck does, if the premise of the deck, or my description of the deck, gets the other players at the table curious or excited about what my deck is going to do, maybe because they haven't heard of that strategy before, or don't know what cards I'm talking about. For me, that's like that's how I know I've done it right.
Oh yeah. When I sit down across either of these two, I know I'm going to see like 5 to 10 cards I've never heard of. And I'm, just have TCG player pulled up on the side like, okay, I guess I'm getting these.
It's incredibly gratifying, right? Like if you play a card and people are like, what is that thing? And everybody needs to look at it. Like, how did I not know about this card? It's like, it feeds my soul a little bit. Yeah, I see some head nods, yeah.
Another thing that I think that can make a deck weird is taking a commander and flipping it on its head, like changing up the fundamental thing of what you expect that commander to be able to do. And so a lot of these things are what we're going to talk about today. So let's dig in a little bit more. But part of the equation here, weird but works, is how can we tell when a deck works? And Bert, do you have a thought about this?
So it's really hard sometimes, right? Because a deck can work and you can still not enjoy it. Is one of the things that I've learned. And by working, you can be winning games, but you still not enjoy it. So working for me is just, I'm able to do my game plan consistently and sometimes concisely depending on what I want the deck to do. Cause sometimes I want it to be a little bit quicker, you know, I wanna do my game plan a little bit faster than my opponent. So, I just think that it works when you can do that game plan consistently. And not, when I say consistently, I don't mean the same thing every time. You can get a different, like, sometimes there are part A and part B plans to a deck, and you can get part A one time and then part B the next time, but so long as you are doing both of those plans consistently, your deck is working.
Absolutely. I think consistency is sort of the key thing to this, and a lot of us will be talking about redundancy and consistency. But I think do the thing is sort of the popular descriptor for that. As long as your deck does the thing, then in my opinion, it works. Especially if you're leaning into the weird, is what really makes it, as a decker, like, it's my baby, it's doing the thing, yeah, so.
I noticed we didn't really talk about winning though. Is that distinct for you guys about how, like, whether or not the deck is functioning? Does winning play into that at all?
I think for me the criteria is whether or not I can demonstrate, not even winning, but like whether or not I can demonstrate that the thing that I'm doing, like, you need to pay attention to it. Right? Like for me, I know my deck works if even if I don't win, if at one point in the table or in the game, the table was like, oh, we got to do something about Brad.
It could win, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Like winning, I think for me, like is like when I win a game with a weird deck, I'm like, okay, yeah, I know for certain now this deck works, but I don't know that that's necessarily a requirement.
Yeah.
I think for everybody, it's sort of a personal thing where I know for me, as long as my deck essentially gets to do the collection of cards, the combo that I put into it, and I lose, I feel really great, especially if I lose after, like, immediately after doing that cool thing, because people are like, nope, we can't let Benji do more things. So that's one way that I look at it. And yeah, moving right along. So what criteria do we have for selecting a commander for weird builds? I know for me, a lot of the stuff that goes into my decision is sort of aesthetics, or does it help the thing that I've built the rest of the deck to do? Or does it, hey, sometimes you just need the colors, right? 4 colors tricky, and sometimes you just need to throw 2 partners together, even if you don't think they like each other very much. Any other thoughts about selecting?
Yeah, for me, a big criteria I usually have is that the commander's design is open-ended. Like, I don't want my commander to tell me exactly what this deck is doing, every facet of the plan. So, like, a lot of the commanders that I pick are, like, I have a soft spot for commanders that say, when you do the thing, make a creature token.
Yes.
But like, a lot of my favorite commanders are, they interact with a broad class of card. When you cast an instant or sorcery, when 1 or more cards leave your graveyard, and then that gives me a lot of freedom to customize the deck however I want.
I noticed, Brad, you actually had a note in there that I really liked as well, where it's like, you can really take advantage of a generic value engine commander to try out like weird, like niche stuff.
Yeah, like if you have a really off the wall concept, then like a commander that's just like you draw a bunch of cards is perfect. Even if like the commander itself isn't all that interesting, but it lets your 99 shine more.
Oh yeah. One of the neat things about using a generic value engine commander is that it really lets you try out the mechanic of the month, whatever's in the new set. An example would be, I did a Henzi deck using backup as a mechanic, which was really, that was strange. A lot of tokens. So that's a neat thing that those commanders can do for you as well. So a follow-up question to that is, how important are your commanders to your builds typically? And that's a great question, right? Like, how important is it to you to get your commander on the field for your deck to work? Or, in some cases, do you even care about casting your commander. Sometimes the commander is just like, cool, this is where that sits. It will never come out.
I think I rarely build decks where I don't care about the commander, at least in some way. I don't know that I always rely on the commander to win the game, but like, I don't know, having an extra frog that I can cast is probably, I don't know, like, so I need to care about it at least in some way, or else it's probably not going to be a deck that I build, but.
Yeah, there have been a couple of decks of mine that, in particular, I either want to cast my commander as soon as possible, or like, it's kind of an emergency button. It's the emergency meeting button from Among Us. Like, it's just like, okay, I need help. Commander time.
We need to get some oil in this machine.
A throwback, but Damia, Sage of Stone was
Goody.
my emergency button commander for a very long time.
Yeah, reload your hand every turn?
Yeah, just
love
reload my
that.
hand. I'm out of cards. I need the help.
Yeah, I think a lot of my decks do heavily rely on the commander, but I tend to pick commanders that aren't like magnets for removal. Right, like one of my favorite decks I have is a Quintorius Field Historian deck. And that deck does not function if I don't have Quintorius on the field. But rarely are people super worried about getting him off the board. So like there's just almost always a bigger threat.
I think that that's so important also to finding a weird deck is being able to take a commander that people don't play or that you don't see out in the wild and sort of making that be something that helps your deck shine. Because like people are gonna remember that. I remember and I look forward to playing against your Quintorius deck because I don't see that. I don't see that guy in the wild. So we're gonna talk more about some of the stuff that we talked about in the beginning, giving more specific examples. And so first up is being inspired by the 99. And so to be inspired by the 99 is to focus more on the cards in the deck than the commander leading the deck. Inherently more difficult due to accomplish, as it requires you to find and successfully use the cards you built around. So an example of this, my notes are so badly written. So yeah, the idea is that like you want to think about redundancy. You want to think about how easily you can get the cards in your deck that you need to make it capable of doing the thing. But sometimes you can run into a thing where you're so connected and so excited for an idea that you sort of force in really bad cards that don't work and don't support it as much as you think. So you run into those pitfalls that could dissuade you from attempting to try the weird thing. So I always encourage people to try. That's my number one thing, is always try the weird thing. But one of the pitfalls is forcing what doesn't fit or going too all in. Taking just, draft chaff and putting in your commander deck can sometimes be really rewarding. And then other times you're sitting there with a handful of cards you don't want to play. And you don't know you want to play them, or you don't know that you don't want to play them until you're in that moment, looking at your hand going, well, cool. So one example that I have here is adding colors to legendary creatures. So I'm going to give it an actual deck example here. I have a deck where my thought process was, what if we gave green to Exodus, Auric Overlord? And so a quick reminder of what Exodus does. 2/4, legendary human warlock with double strike. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, return target non-legendary creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And I thought, well, Marby's cool, but what if it had green? Like, that would be cool.
Is this another one of those examples of partners that don't like each other very much, Benji?
Yes. So yeah, this ended up with me forcing Vile Smasher and Sidar Kondo to like shack up and enjoy a space together. It's like the worst reality television show you've ever seen. But it ended up like, as you're going through that deck building process, you end up finding like kind of fun, weird, niche things to do. And what I realized here, one of the linchpins of how this deck works, is all of the creatures in the deck have power 2 or less. So you get to sort of support one commander while also benefiting from what the other does for you. So that's a neat way that you can sort of take a commander and say, hey, I think that there's more that this can do if you have access to more colors. Anyone have any thoughts about something that you've added a legendary creature? Like, oh, this feels really great now that I have this color available.
I have a question. So, like, take this deck for example. Do you find, like, did you have to find ways to, like, other ways to do what Exodus does so the deck works if you don't have Exodus? Or was it more about just consistently finding Exodus every game?
So it definitely ended up being that I needed to work a lot of recursion into the deck to allow the deck to sort of function as if Exodus were out. But what I noticed in my games is that when Exodus was out, it was really firing. Which is an example of like when you know that in the 99 is working for you. But yeah, this deck specifically required an absolute larger amount of recursion than I'm typically used to running. Does anyone else have decks that they've built like that where you're like, I want to give this cool creature access to another color?
Yeah, well, I actually built so Blanca came out, and I'm not really a huge Street Fighter fan, but like Blanca came out, I love this card. But one of the problems I found out when I played Blanca was I ran out of cards a lot. Because I'm just playing my hand out. So I was just like, okay, well, what if we added blue for some card draw? And then now that deck is Calamax, so it's the Storm Siren, but it's still it's Draft Shaft deck where I'm playing Antagonize and like Giant Growth, Berserk, and all this kind of stuff where I'm trying to pump up Calamax, but he also copies the stuff, so my cards are getting more mileage out of them. So really adding that color sometimes can really just make your deck pop off.
That sounds terrifying.
I mean, it just takes out one player and I die, but...
Every Voltron player understands that.
That's how you know it works.
Yeah.
Another inspired by the 99 would be putting a spell in the command zone.
This is an Oathbreaker.
That's a great point. Let's move on now. So I think that there's a lot of really cool, well, specifically sorceries out there that if you could build an entire deck around them, it would be kind of weird. I keep using this word. So an example of something that I did, well, let me go ahead and so it's not an effect a legendary creature provides. So that's the important thing, is that if you're gonna build around a spell in the 99, it should be doing something that you can't do in the command zone already. It does not require a commander out in order to be useful, and it should be impactful or game ending. Essentially, you don't want to throw something into the quote-unquote command zone that is not going to propel the game forward. You want something that's going to matter when you cast it, especially if people go, what was that card? I've never heard of that. So that's a great feeling. An example of mine is that I really love the card Spiteful Repossession. It is a card that damages everybody and gives you a bunch of treasures equal to the amount of lands they have more than you. And every time I thought about playing this card, you know what I realized? That's like 3 per person, unless you sap all your lands. And then you're talking. And that's where this card really shined. Does anyone have a similar example where a spell was like, yeah, let's go?
I have a Ban Enchantress deck built around Dance of Demands.
That card's sweet.
I love that. I played that in Standard, in Pioneer. It was so great. So of course I had to play it in Commander. But yeah, it's exactly what you're talking about. Dance of the Manse is the kind of card that when if you build the deck right, you cast Dance of the Manse and the game ends that turn.
I adore that card. Thank you for playing that.
There were a lot of head nods and smiles in the audience. I think you found your people. Very cool.
So one last thing that I'm going to talk about for Inspired by the 99 is the idea of a secret commander. And this is a weird. There it is. Do a shot every time I say weird. This is a thing where a lot of people try to make a quote-unquote secret commander work, but try to still force it to be like a legendary creature in the 99s. So the idea is really that you're taking a permanent, doesn't have to be a legendary creature, and building your deck around that. Having that on the field is going to make a huge difference in your game. typically going to be a permanent versus an instant or sorcery, right? Because like you want it to be up and continuing to have effect. So what is, do any of y'all have a secret commander deck before I talk about mine?
Well, it's actually real funny because I couldn't sleep on the way here, so I actually brewed a Mishra Eminent one day, and I was just like, I just want to play the Simulacrum Synthesizer, and I want all of the Simulacrum Synthesizers, and so if I just make Simulacrum Synthesizers, I can just Simulacrum and synthesize, and then Simulacrum, like, I can just do that. Okay, so that's a deck I built on the way here, actually.
So
Or brewed.
you're just talking about mass production.
Yeah.
Got it. Gross. One card that I thought would be cool to build around was Chthonian Nightmare, which is a really cool energy card printed in Modern Horizons 3. And I realized, hey, if you use Dryad Arbor, you can actually just sort of loop this without paying any extra energy. So when you're doing a secret commander, it's really, you notice when that card's out how well oiled your machine gets. And if you're gonna do that, poison people, because poison ends games. So that's some ideas there in regards to being inspired by the 99. We're gonna segue on over to Brad. He's gonna talk to us about unexpected mechanics.
All right. Well, so when we talk about unexpected mechanics, I mean, it's kind of right there in the name, right? And it goes back to that that aha moment I was talking about earlier, where when you're describing your deck to what your deck does to the other people at the table, and they go, wow, that's so cool, I've never heard of that thing. Or like that moment where you pull out a Traxapraetor's Voice, and you're like, it's not that kind of a Traxa deck. But maybe with a different commander, because everyone does that with a Traxa. But, so, I have up here a couple examples of things that I've built, and I think an important thing to understand here, or well, I guess decks that fall into this category are not only things that where like the mechanic is not something that people have heard of or built around, but it could also be something that's weird for your commander specifically, or even just the color identity of your deck. So one example I have up there, you see I have a Gadwick the Wizened mono blue devotion deck. And the funny thing about instants and sorceries is that they do not contribute to your devotion. So I don't have any of them in the deck. And building a deck, a mono blue deck, to work well while ignoring arguably two of its strongest card types was a bit of a challenge. But the deck itself is built around the ideas of devotion are things that are adjacent to it. So like creatures that care about the number of islands I control or the number of cards in my hand, things like that. And so not playing around instants and sorceries meant that I had to fit my vegetables, as we say, the interaction and the card draw and all that stuff in other ways. And it was honestly a really fun deck building challenge. I would definitely encourage you to try giving yourself a deck building restriction like that. Another deck I have up there, you'll see, is Sethron in general. This is a Rakdos Minotaurs deck, but it has this sort of side strategy of Mass Reanimator, right? So Sethron gives you a Minotaur token every time a non-token Minotaur enters. So if you can get a lot of them to enter at the same time, you can get a really big board really quickly, and it also helps that Sethron can give them haste. So what I learned was, as I was playing this deck, that rather than just jamming 40 Minotaurs, which generally aren't super powerful creatures, I could put fewer Minotaurs, but have like wheels and sack outlets and board wipes to fill up my graveyard, and then bring them all back with like Living Death or Patriarch Spinning or something, and then give them haste and swing on an empty board.
This sounds, by the way, like the cow level from Diablo.
Yes. So some things to keep in mind when you're building like this, and I think you'll hear this from several of us as we talk about this. But I've found that iteration is important. If you're building around a weird mechanic or a weird strategy, You know, you're not gonna go find an EDH deck building template that really works for you because you're doing it weird. So one of my pieces of advice is to just get a deck list together and try it. And try to identify where your weaknesses are and where your strengths are. For example, that Gadret deck that I was talking about. Turns out when you cast a spell and it's a permanent that goes on the board and provides long-term advantage, it's going to cost more than your normal instants and sorceries. So that Gadret deck needs access to a lot more mana, because my counterspell costs 4 mana instead of 1 or 2. And so finding ways, for example, in that deck really capitalizes on Nykthos. And so I have Expedition Map to find Nykthos, and Urza's Saga to find Expedition Map, and I can use Trade Routes or something to untap it to reuse it over and over again. Some of my favorite decks have been completely reworked from the ground up multiple times before I actually figured out the way that I wanted to do it. Another thing to keep in mind with these weird decks is learning how to play the deck matters. And this is true for every deck that you'll ever play in Magic, but it's especially true for something that's off the wall. Your weird strategy is going to have a very specific set of needs that is different from other decks. And so you need, through practice, to learn like what kinds of cards or strategies are the biggest threat to yours. How do you need to sequence your cards to make all your weird Rube Goldberg machine come together. And my last important piece of advice is that, again, is card advantage matters, which, again, is true in every case, but if you're building around an unexpected mechanic, there might not be a lot of cards that fit that theme. So you need to draw a lot more extra cards. I find with a lot of my unexpected mechanics decks, I have a higher concentration of 2 mana cards that draw me a card or 2, or rather than having 1 card that draws me 7. Just so I know that I can consistently get the cards that I need. Some pitfalls to avoid. The first one I have here is giving up too soon.
I'm just gonna clap on that.
Yeah, Benji talked about this a little bit, but you kind of have to, like I said before, these decks, you need to iterate them, right? Finding the right balance of cards to make the deck work is hard. So to help with this, I find often that taking a break in your deck building is important. Put the deck on the shelf for a week. Let your brain think about it in the background, and then come back with fresh eyes. And I find that helps a lot. Or even just, like I said, getting a 99 together, playing the deck a few times, seeing how it works. Another pitfall that I've fallen into sometimes is focusing too hard on a gimmick. It can really clog up your deck and make it too inefficient to function. And so sometimes, your weird deck just needs a greater hit behemoth to finish the game. Sometimes you just got to put those staples in there. And lastly, niche cards can be inefficient. They cost more mana. They don't target the same number of permanents, and you want to play them because they're fun. But just keep that in mind that it goes back to learning how to play the deck, right? Knowing when to spend those spells, what things to target, will really go a long way.
I just want to add real quick that when you're doing a lot of these unusual decks, you're kind of not able to take a lot of data that you can find online, so EDA track and sources like that may not be as useful. So that's where that just giving it, time, playing the deck, figuring out what works and how it works for you is really important.
Sure. All right, I will make this quick because I know that we're getting short on time here, friends. But another great way to build a funky deck is to focus on a weird creature type, right? There are, at least I made this presentation at the beginning of the year. This was before Aetherdrift was released, so recent as of then. But there were 300 creature types in Magic as of January 1st. And so decks typically run an average of 20 to 30 or so creatures. So we want to focus on creatures that have at least 20, right? And at least 20 of that type. We don't want to build a possum-themed deck because I think there are 2, maybe 1 at this point. I don't know. Yeah, you could use creatures with changeling and stuff, but we want to remember we want these decks to work. We want them to do something, and just having a bunch of changelings that are just another guy is not necessarily going to be a great strategy there. So yeah, let's see here. if we, one of the ways that I kind of define atypical is, like, I looked at ADHREC because they have a lot of really great data here. 80% of all listed kindred decks are comprised of 25 creature types. So we've got angel, assassin, cat, demon, dinosaur, dragon, Eldrazi, elf, fairy, goblin, horror, human, hydra, knight, merfolk, Mir, Phyrexian, pirate, rat, sliver, soldier, spirit, vampire, wizard, and zombie. All of us have encountered at least one of those decks.
Oh, yeah.
But if you think of something that's maybe not on that list, right? So something that is not in the top 80%, that would be something that I would consider atypical, right? So we want more than 20 creatures. There's going to be about, I think there's 150 creature types in Magic that has more than 20 creatures. And then we want something that's maybe not in the top 80% of those strategies that a lot of people will typically play. So, so there are 3 different approaches. You can look at creature type first, or you could look at the commander first, or you could look at like a specific mechanic and build around that. If you are focused on the creature type, right? Then you can choose like an atypical creature type, like cleric, for instance. There are so many clerics in Magic, with so few cleric decks. You can figure out kind of what it's good at, and then build a deck that does that thing. Clerics specifically are really good at gaining life, so you might consider like a life gain drain kind of situation that wins with something silly like an Aether's Flux Reservoir or a Test of Endurance or something like that. So look at the creatures, look at what they do, and then figure out like something that you can do that leans into that, right? Next, you can look at a commander, right? So you can choose a legendary creature that you really love that has, and then you can find an atypical creature type that kind of works with that, right? So your commander doesn't necessarily have to have the same creature type as the creatures in the deck. I think that's really important here. So for instance, Una is a fairy wizard, but would just destroy people in a rogue typal deck, because she makes rogues, right? And so like you don't necessarily have to have the same creature type in the zone as you do for the creature type that you focus on for your deck. Lastly here, we can look at mechanics, right? So this is probably my favorite approach of the 3. So you want to think about a mechanic that you really love, and then find an atypical creature type that kind of synergizes with it. Now, one of the things I'm going to look at here is Madness and Spell Shapers, right? So Spell Shapers discard cards, and Madness says, I really like when you discard cards because you can cast me cheaper, right? So Spell Shaper is probably not a creature type a lot of you have, that has occurred to a lot of you. But yeah, they famously discard cards and then make a spell effect happen. And so if you couple that with Madness, for instance, that could be kind of cool. So yeah, think about a mechanic that you really want to lean in, or a creature type that you really want to lean into, and then a mechanic that kind of feeds into that. So yeah, that's what I got. I think we're going to skip this section. Then we're just going to get down to Bert. You're at the end here. Powering up a weaker strategy.
Hello. So powering up weaker strategies. So here I have an example of Simon, Eye Storm, and Elk of Crossroads Augur. Basically, I had a deck where I wanted to draw as many cards as possible. I wanted every ancestral recall I could possibly have, and Elgith makes that happen. But even easier, you kind of run out of cards when you just look at cards that scry. So to kind of shore that up, we added Psione as a partner. Psione says that when a creature with flying attacks, use scry X, where X is the number of attacking creatures with flying. So basically, I was able to draw cards. You have Elgith and Psione out. I can draw my 4 cards because they print a flyer in every set, y'all. It's not gonna be good all the time, but they print a flyer. So having strategies that kind of work into one another is very important for powering up a weaker strategy, because mono blue flying is not an easy, but it's fun. It's a good time, and you definitely can have a fun time. Now this is one of my favorite ones in synergistic veggies. You can write it down. MTG Bert hates Cultivate. I know. So the only reason I hate Cultivate is because a lot of people just jam it in the deck just because it's Cultivate, right? But so right here I have an example of Mazarek Pool of Death Freeze. I would play Cultivate in this deck. I would, however, play Primal Growth. Primal Growth says it has kicked or sacrifice a creature, which Mazarek loves when you sacrifice a creature. And then you search for a basic, but if you kick it instead, you search for new basics, and they come in untapped. So it's a little bit better than Cultivate in this particular deck. I'm not saying Cultivate's a deck card, right? Don't quote me on that. But cards that synergize with other cards in your deck really make a difference when you're trying to power up a strategy, right? Do y'all have any other examples of a card that maybe isn't as popular but powers up a strategy that you had?
Turn to Frog.
I have, in that Gadwick deck that I was talking about, one of the reasons I was excited to build it was because of a card called Verity Circle. So with Verity Circle and Gadwick, it's when I cast a blue spell, draw a card.
I'm just a big fan of Dispatch as a removal spell, and if you're playing an artifact heavy deck, I know it's pretty straightforward, but I'm a big fan.
Yeah, Growth Spasm is another card that people probably haven't seen, but Growth Spasm makes Eldrazi spawn, and again, you can sacrifice the Eldrazi spawn for some mana, and you're essentially getting 2 lands out of it. One of them is a creature, but you can sacrifice that to add some mana, and guess who loves to be sacrificed? I like Mazarek. I don't know if y'all can tell. I just think he's geek. But there are just a ton of cards that can synergize in the veggie slot. Veggies are super important to our decks. The interaction, the card draw, the ramp. But we don't always have to run those regular cards that do that thing. And next I'm going to talk about the regular cards that do the thing. Yeah, the one. Listen, okay, wait a minute.
Advertising game changers over here?
We're talking game changers over here, okay?
This presentation was made before game changers began.
But listen, adding just a powerful card to a deck can really make the difference. If you're playing like if you're playing green and you're playing like a weaker creature type, but you have like, say 20 of those creature cards, the Great Henge, it powers up your creatures and it, but I'm not saying always run these cards, but what I'm saying is be mindful of when you pick these cards because they can definitely power up your strategy if you need some power to shore that up. The One Ring, I don't gotta say nothing about the One Ring. It slaps. It's a game changer for a reason, and so is Feathering Tide.
I just want to add real quick that we're definitely not going to tell people not to run strong cards.
Right.
The bracket system that was announced will help give some context to that. But sometimes you're running an attraction deck and you just need some gas.
Yeah.
It's a thing.
So yeah, that's all that I have.
Yeah.
I think we can just probably skip straight to questions here, friends. I know we're over time, and I appreciate you all staying 9 minutes late with us. We appreciate you. But we would love to take some questions. Our friend is walking around with a microphone, and yeah, anywhere in the back there. Probably we'll give it like 5 minutes or so here, and then we'll cut it. Yeah. I didn't hear. I heard your voice. I did not hear the microphone. But do companions work instead of partners? Is what you're asking? So are you referring to like from a deck building restriction perspective? Yeah, absolutely. Companions are great at providing that for sure. Companions, I think, are probably one of the easiest ways that you can give yourself a really great deck building restriction, and you should use them more.
I think companions add an additional wrinkle to it, which is worth exploring, definitely. We had another question. I know we have one right here.
Yeah, I think we're getting some microphones fixed, but we'll answer the question here in the front because I can hear you with you're sitting right in front of me.
Yes. Have you ever built a deck where it just seemed like you kept adding themes to it, like it just synergized with more than you expected?
Benji just made a sound.
I'd love to know because I did that.
So we were asked, for those of you in the back, have we ever built a deck where we kept adding themes to it, or kept, we couldn't stop adding themes or mechanics to the deck? So we have 5 mechanics in this person's deck.
I have definitely done this. It's when you brew as much as I do, it's definitely a pitfall that you just run into. You're just like, hey, cool, these cards are all neat, and they kind of work with this other card, and they also kind of work with this other card, and suddenly you've got a vehicle zombie mill deck, and you're like, this isn't playing well. Sometimes you just have to like be able to know how to edit a little bit, or maybe all of this stuff just happens to work together. Like the Vile Smasher in Citadel Condo is a 2 or less power reanimation Spellslinger deck. Like, it shouldn't work. By all means, if you look at it, it's like Kronk holding up the thing. You're like, I don't know how we got here. But once you actually see it in action, you can see it makes sense. So it's just a matter of like, just sticking with it or going, yeah, I would love to do this thing, but it's not paying me off to do it. Like when I play this deck, this is always the thing I don't want to do. So just a matter of like, balancing that sort of thing. Good question.
Do you have any other questions? I think we got some over here. We're making our microphone friend really work for this. I apologize.
You rock.
Give a hand for Jack.
What is one of the most difficult niche card mechanics you've ever tried to make into a deck, and how did you kind of fix it or help make it work?
What is the most difficult mechanic or archetype that we've tried to build into a deck, and what are things that we've done to make it work? That's a good question.
So I just want to say, can I plug you here, Benji? Benji hosts a stream where we build decks, and basically he spins a wheel. And so it spins a wheel, gives you a color combination, and gives you a theme for the deck. I was on, and my color combination was Simic. Okay, cool. We got all the things we need, right? Except my theme was life game.
Oh.
And so it was an interesting, I don't think, and then there's a 60-minute time limit as well.
I haven't tuned into Brewing with Wendy. It's a great stream.
It's
right there.
Yeah, I have never struggled to build a deck like that in my life. We found some return to Nick's common or uncommon that gains you life equal to your devotion or something like that. And I was like, this is an all-star. This is the best card in the deck. And then we ended up on Clement, the Moonbounce Frog for the commander, and it somehow came together and it works, but it is technical, I will say. So that really was just a hard strategy for me because I wasn't ready for Simic Life Gain, I can tell you that.
No one's ready for Simic Life Gain.
I think we probably have time for 2 questions if they're quick, 1 if it's less quick. So we got one right here. I don't know if you can just be loud. Okay,
Yeah.
I appreciate you.
Are there any weird mechanics that you're waiting for cards to come out that can actually make it work? Like you were talking about zombie mill vehicles. Is there a zombie mill vehicle formula that you're just waiting for cards to come out to make viable?
I just pulled stuff out to answer that. But Steph has we have talked about this. Steph actually has a good answer for this.
I have a waiting list, and it's largely weird creature types. I've been waiting for more giant support forever.
Yes.
And okay, I've found my people as well. Thank you. So as soon as they said the word as soon as they said the word Lorwyn last year at MagicCon, I was I had it on my calendar, but then they pushed it out. They pushed the roadmap out to next year. I know there's some groans, but I cannot wait for some more giants. I probably need 3 or 4 more giants to make a really great, 3 or 4 solid ones, right, with some good synergy. I think that will seal the deal here. Yeah, but usually I'm waiting on weird creature types is my thing. It's not necessarily mechanics, but weird creature types. I would like a few more of those that function. Yeah.
I'm gonna add in that Spell Shapers need a legend.
They have one. Her name is Jaya.
We need a new
The
one.
OG Planeswalker.
We also
She's on the right list.
Jund Cycling.
I feel like Kenny can kind of count as a spell shapery in the zone. It gives you different colors. I feel like that's close enough. One more question, and then we'll call it good here. We got one right there in the back of the pink.
Have you ever tried to build a common
Ooh. Have we tried to build a common creature type with an unusual mechanic?
So I have a Bant Merfolk deck, and I want to preface that by saying I was doing it before Exelon. I'm a hipster.
Yeah, we were doing it before it was cool.
Yeah, reading my Merfolk deck before it was cool. But I don't know. So Island Walk isn't necessarily like a weird mechanic for Merfolk to have. In fact, there are 2 Merfolk that give all of your Merfolk Island Walk. But I did lean hard into giving my opponents islands. That deck, if it doesn't really have a secret commander, but if it did, it would be Quicksilver Fountain. And I was very happy when they made, what is it, Harbinger of the Seas?
Oh, that's it.
Yeah, but that's an MLD card now, Brad.
I know. That deck is bracket 3, but it does have this one card that maybe makes it actually bracket 4. But
Yeah. I think it's
plays
great.
like bracket 3, I promise.
All right, my friends, we are beyond time. Thank you. 45 minutes of your time on this huge. Thank you for being here. Have a good year. If y'all haven't followed this guy here, his name is, you guys have Benji the Brewer on the internet. That is, he's got the fun wheel string that we were talking about before. Definitely give him a follow. We have MTG Bert, and then Brad and I are Steel City Brad and Steel City Steph. Find us on the internet if you'd like to talk about weird decks. But thanks for being here, friends.
Do I end?
Oh, you wanted to do the weird but it works thing, didn't we?
Oh yeah, yeah. Can you pull that before I
yeah.
hit end?